You see it a lot of times with your national corporate owned state run media. They're very dangerous in the sense that they have their own agendas they're trying to push. Their focus is not on real journalism, it's on sensationalism and making money. Obviously, networks like CNN, MSNBC, ABC, NBC, CBS, they all follow this kind of formula. When somebody says, "Oh, the liberal media," da da da, oh, it's not so much the liberal media. It's the national, state-run, corporate-owned media that's interested in sensationalism and profit. Now, you've also got news networks like Fox News that do a similar thing on the completely different end of the spectrum. And they also put out their own propaganda to sensationalize things, to ultimately drive home their point and appeal to their audience the way that they want to get their audience to buy into what they want them to buy into. Fox News has had an incredibly genius business model doing this crap. I mean, they've sat there for almost 20 years now and argued that they're fair and balanced when they clearly are not. They may be a balance in one sense to all the other different types of media, but fair and balanced they clearly are not. And anybody to argue that is completely delusional, period. But that doesn't take away from the fact that they've had a genius business model. They found their audience, they found the propaganda that they wanted to continue to drill in these people's heads month after month, year after year, decade after decade now. And it's worked. And you also got to keep in mind that in history, to the winner goes the spoils, and the winners end up writing the history books. And the winners will always make themselves look righteous in their cause, and they will make themselves look as good as they possibly can. And the only time they're ever going to make the losers look good is in a way that only ultimately ends up setting up the winners, the writers of the history books, to look even better. You see this especially in American history books, talking about wars and talking about the slaughter and the enslaving of the Native Americans and so many other things. The bottom line is that history books are written to make the Anglo-Saxon, Caucasian, European American cause look as good as it possibly could at the expense of everybody else. And the only time you ever make any other individuals look okay is only to ultimately make the white Americans look even better. That's how our history books work in this country, flat out, period. But it's very dangerous when people actually start to buy into this unadulterated BS and they start to fully believe in it and they start to become fully engrossed in it and become, departed from reality and become so detached from the facts that they start to believe the lies. And this definitely holds true in the world of the WWE when it comes to professional wrestling and some of the propaganda and lies that they have told us as wrestling fans over the years in order, since they are the winners and they are the ones that have been able to write the wrestling history books, to get us to buy into and believe in what they are saying and the righteousness of the WWE cause to ultimately make themselves look better. Well, the reason I bring this up is for several years now, the WWF, and in particular Vince and K. McMahon, have prostituted out this propaganda machine that Stone Cold Steve Austin is the greatest superstar in WWE and wrestling history. And, I do this video even though I'm a huge Steve Austin fan. I used to love Stone Cold. I mean, he was one of the guys during his time. He was incredibly hot as a character and a performer. He was just cool as shit. They did so many crazy, off-the-wall, original things with him. How could you not like Stone Cold Steve Austin? In an era today where your baby faces can't get cheered by more than 50% of the audience in most of the venues you work, he was one of those almost unanimous baby faces that everybody loved. What happened to the days when we had baby faces that everybody could love? Those are the days. And when you could do that, that's when you made really true, huge, transcendent stars. And beyond question, Stone Cold Steve Austin is one of the greatest superstars and one of the biggest stars in the history of the professional wrestling business. But there are a lot of problems to me with this whole statement that Stone Cold is the greatest of all time. First and foremost is, how could somebody be the greatest of all time at anything if they basically were only at the top for 3 years? And when you look at Stone Cold Steve Austin, in effect, he was really only at the top for 3 years. Because for about a year, during the heart of the Attitude Era, during the Monday Night Wars, he was out of commission. He wasn't there. The company relied on The Rock and the Mankinds and the Triple H's and the Mr. McMahons and the Undertakers and the Kanes. Those guys to take the ball and run with it and carry the company, the big shows. And they did. The company really didn't miss a beat without the so-called biggest superstar in history and the biggest star in the business. They didn't miss a beat. They were just fine. They really were. And to suggest that they weren't really is, missing the point, and really means you have bought into this propaganda because you've been programmed for so long by the WWE to believe this propaganda. This comes back to the whole thing of ego when it comes to, not wanting to acknowledge the true greatness of Hulk Hogan. This also ultimately comes down to the ego of one individual in particular, and that is Vince K. McMahon. Now, during the Attitude Era, who is the individual that you most closely associate with Stone Cold Steve Austin? The answer is the Mr. McMahon character, Vincent K. McMahon. So, if you are the guy that ultimately prevailed in the Monday Night Wars, which Vincent K. McMahon did, if you are the guy that now runs professional wrestling sports entertainment like Vincent K. McMahon does, you're going to have a healthy, man-sized ego. And more power to him. There's nothing wrong with having an ego. Frankly, when you're Vincent K. McMahon, you deserve the right to have a damn ego. And as a result, when you have that ego, you're going to want to continue to feed that ego. I know I have a monster ego. It might not be Vincent K. sized, brother, but it's a big sized one, brother, period. I know I love as much as possible to feed myself with reassuring things to remind myself of my own awesomeness. And that's exactly what the fuck Vincent K. McMahon does. You even see it in the WWE DVDs about WCW and ECW and all this. There are always those little underhanded, backhanded comments or way things are presented that sit there and always remind you that the WWE is the top dogs. The WWE were the winners. Like that one Monday Night Wars DVD they did. Oh my God, that was so condescending and underhanded the way they presented the WCW case. It was everything ultimately was WWE was roses and they were always the best. And blah, 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 blah. Oh, what a bunch of bullshit. But what this is about is it's about saying that if Austin's the greatest of all time, that means that Vince McMahon, who always wanted to be a wrestler, is one of the greatest of all time. And if the whole flaw of this logic is this, let's look at football for a second. A Hall of Fame running back, Gale Sayers, is considered a legend in the history of pro football, and he's got a bust in Canton. Even though he only played 71 professional football games, and his time at the top was really only about 4 years, people still look at him to this day as one of the icons of the position. They look at him as one of the all-time greats. But they also think about him with this short run as a top-tier running back of 3.5, 4 years and say, what could have been, and what if he wouldn't have torn up his knee, and da-da-da, and da-da-da. What if the technology would have been better when he did tear up his knee, da-da-da, da-da-da. But nobody ever talks about Gale Sayers being the best running back of all time. They don't talk about him in the same class as somebody like Walter Payton or Jim Brown or a Barry Sanders or an Emmitt Smith or an Eric Dickerson or so on and so forth. You get the fucking point. He was an all-time great, but he's not at this level. He's not where you could argue that he's the greatest of all time. Why? In part because he only had a very short, limited run at the top. Period. It's like in baseball. All the old fucks love to talk about Sandy Koufax and how dominant he was, even though Pedro's top 4 years, to me, were more impressive statistically than Sandy Koufax's, and Randy Johnson had more overall dominant years than a Sandy Koufax. Those two guys, to me, I would rather take over Sandy Koufax because, yes, his star burned brighter for 4 or 5 years at the very, very top, but Pedro's numbers in his best 4 or 5 years almost equally match up in a much less pitcher-friendly era compared to what Koufax played in that kind of dead ball era, that very pitcher-friendly era of the early and mid-'60s. But nobody ever classifies with a brain anyways, other than old curmudgeonly baseball writers that should just keel off and die anyways. Nobody with a brain ever considers Sandy Koufax the greatest pitcher of all time. They view him maybe as an all-time great, one of the greatest, but they never talk about him as the great. Why? Because he didn't have a long enough sustained dominant run at the top to be able to justify that type of positioning in everybody's consciousness and minds. How is a guy like Stone Cold Steve Austin going to be the greatest of all time when not only did he really only effectively have a true 3-year run at the top, he might not even have been the biggest star of his era. There was a period of time in 2001 and 2002 where Rock was every bit the star of Austin, if not had surpassed him already. Not to mention the fact that, to me, for my money, the biggest star of the Attitude Era has always been Vincent K. McMahon. Why? because it was Vince McMahon that really helped fully kickstart the Attitude Era with the Montreal Screwjob, him coming on Raw talking about Brett Screwed Brett. I have no sympathy for him whatsoever. And so many characters of the Attitude Era. Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Rock, Mankind, Undertaker, Kane, Triple H, Kurt Angle, Jericho, everybody in that damn company at some point in time was made better because of their involvement with Vincent K. McMahon. Period. How can Austin be the greatest of all time when he might not even have been the greatest of his own era? That's how I talk about it. Again, it's about that ego of Vince wanting to say, oh my God, I worked with Austin. If I call him the greatest, what does that make me? Because we've programmed the people for so many years to believe, and understandably so, that in order for this guy to be great, this guy's got to be great too, and they got to make each other better. That does make a lot of sense. But you also think about this. Austin only main evented 3 WrestleManias, 2 of which were inside 20,000 or less seat venues. You got WrestleMania 14 in Boston and WrestleMania 15 in Philly. You know, WrestleMania 17 down in Houston, Texas, yeah, that was in a big venue. But that was the only one where Austin was the unadulterated, pure main event. Not WrestleMania 18 or 19. He's really, frankly, afterthoughts on those shows. WrestleMania 17's it. Whereas you've got a guy like Hulk Hogan, who main evented WrestleMania 3 in front of 93,000 people. WrestleMania 6 at the Sky Dome in front of 60-plus thousand people. WrestleMania 8, the Hoosier Dome, a not great show. A not too compelling main event. Still packed about 70,000 people into the damn Hoosier Dome. Hulk Hogan had a 9-year run at the top of the WWF as the unquestioned biggest star, not only in his company, but in the wrestling business period during his time, for a 9-year fucking stretch. 9 years! He was the biggest star in the business. He was the biggest star in his own damn company. Then he goes to WCW, to where, oh, that's right. When he forms the NWO with Hall and Nash, they start kicking the shit out of the WWF in the ratings war for the next damn 80-plus damn weeks. Including a stretch of time in 97 and early 98 when, oh yeah, that's right, the Stone Cold Steve Austin character was really taking off and booming. It was booming so much that they were still lagging behind in the ratings to WCW and Monday Nitro, and that is an unquestioned fact. But yet Stone Cold Steve Austin is the greatest of all time. Hell, after he won the belt at WrestleMania 14, the next couple weeks on Raw, they were still losing to WCW in the ratings when Hulk Hogan was still a top guy in the NWO. Everything about the NWO and WCW at that time. Austin, after he wins the belt, this great moment at WrestleMania 14 in the next few weeks, they're still losing in the fucking ratings. When did they really start to turn the corner in the ratings? When the Mr. McMahon character really fucking took off. That's when it started to happen. So don't give me this bullshit about Austin, who is an all-time great. One of the greatest of all time. One of the biggest superstars of all time. Is the unquestioned greatest superstar of all time. When he wasn't even the greatest fucking superstar in his own company at that time. And hasn't even been the biggest superstar in the history of his company. Fucking Hulk Hogan goes to a company in WCW, completely changes, becomes a heel, and is the hottest thing in the business for 2 damn years. On top of the 9 years, he was the unquestioned top guy in professional wrestling as the top guy in the WWF. To this day, Hulk Hogan has more name recognition. To this day, Hulk Hogan has more star power. To this day, Hulk Hogan has more mainstream appeal and has more overall visibility and overall recognizability than Stone Cold Steve Austin. But somehow, some way, I am supposed to believe, to this day, even after all the years the WWE has tried to convince me otherwise, I'm supposed to believe that Hulk Hogan is not the biggest superstar of all time. Even more importantly, I could even argue Vince McMahon is. You're going to tell me that because of the propaganda you've received for a decade plus and the way you've been programmed, that I'm supposed to fucking buy into this horse shit that Stone Cold Steve Austin is the biggest superstar of all time? Give me a fucking break. Let's not even get into the pay-per-view buys. This is, when Austin was doing it, they still had, more cable television households than Hogan did during his time. You also had more pay-per-views, but we're also not equating money in the 80s and factoring in inflation from the 90s, early 2000s. Let's not even get into the fucking money discussion here. Because Hogan wins that one too. He's just as hot as Austin ever was, and he did it for a much longer period of time, not in just one company, but two, including a period of time where he was doing it head-to-head against Stone Cold Steve Austin's WWF. You like whoever you want to like, and that's great and terrific. I like Stone Cold Steve Austin. One of the greatest characters and one of the greatest stars and babyfaces in wrestling history. But do not, and I emphasize again, do not come at me with this bullshit anymore. That's WWE or anybody in the IWC, YWC trying to sit there and convince me of all this propaganda that you've been fed by the WWE for years, and apparently you're too dumb to be able to see through it. That somehow I'm supposed to believe that Stone Cold Steve Austin is the biggest fucking superstar in professional wrestling in WWE history. Humbug on that shit. You can sit there and argue whether or not it's Hogan or not. I could sit there and argue maybe for The Rock. I could argue definitely for Vince McMahon. But the one thing I could definitely argue and tell you unequivocally for sure is that Stone Cold Steve Austin is not the greatest of all time and is not the biggest superstar in the history of the WWE. You don't like that? Humbug on your ass, period.